or social justice in our campus or in our community, kind of based off of what we've been studying all semester long. So you're going to hear from them, and then you're also going to hear from some students who are in my Sustainability 418 Nuclear New Mexico class, which these are also projects that had to address in sometimes creative or academic or different interdisciplinary approaches, basically, of addressing some aspect of nuclearism. So that's what you're about to see, and we're going to have a little bit of time at the very end for Q&A for all of the student presentations. All right.
Good afternoon. My name is Kaisa Tihkan.
I'm Allison Merrill.
And I'm Sue Skirman.
And we call our group Fighter Fighters. So, okay, great. So our presentation is going to be about fighter remediation and its potential uses in New Mexico. How do I, space? Okay. So, we focused on nuclear contamination, which we know disproportionately affects low-income and the people of color communities, and impacts their health, soil, water, and air quality. So New Mexico has a long history of nuclear testing, like the Trinity test. And one proposed solution is using plants to effectively remove nuclear contaminants from the soil and water. So what is phytoremediation? It comes from ancient Greek, and it means restoring balance with plants. So both plants and fungi can remove many different types of contaminants, from oil to radioactive isotopes.
Thank you. Some examples of how phytoremediation works include extraction, stabilization, and transformation. With extraction, contamination comes up through the plant's roots, which you can see in the diagram, and other plants stabilize the contamination and keep it from moving towards drinking water, for example. And phytotransformation can break down the contamination to the point where it is no longer toxic. So the three categories we looked at were herbaceous plants, woody plants, and I don't know how to say that word. Is it fungi or fungi? Fungi and mushrooms. So, and fungi help plants break down and take up contamination down at the roots. Don't you love those little clip arts? That's Kaisa's work. Okay, so I looked at herbaceous plants, and they're defined as plants without woody stems, and some examples include mustard greens, alfalfa, and pennycress, but one of the most effective and widely used plants for phytoremediation is the sunflower, which is also on the back of your booklet by Rachel Morgan. Sunflowers grow really fast, and they create a large biomass, and they can uptake a significant amount of contamination from soil and water, but they're especially effective with water. They can also remediate radioactivity. Indian mustard can remediate plutonium, and water hyacinth can remediate strontium-90. And two examples of that: the Department of Energy used sunflowers to remove uranium from contaminated springs at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee. And then in 1994 at Chernobyl, there was an experiment done where they took 50 or 60 sunflower plants and tied them together and made a raft and floated it on a contaminated pond and cleaned up almost all the radioactivity within about 3 weeks. So that's pretty exciting. And then here in New Mexico, one of Eileen's students in Nuclear New Mexico class, I believe, Bridget Yanis, created a group called Sunflowers for Change. And they created, she did community-based participatory research, and they created about a dozen to 15 healing gardens and rain gardens in the International District. And that was to remediate, it was an attempt to remediate vapors from the jet fuel, which is in our aquifer. So, yeah, and that's an ongoing project.
And I looked at the trees used for phytoremediation. So contaminant uptake by trees can be more effective than by herbaceous plants, mainly because of a deeper root system and greater yield of biomass. And actually, poplars, hybrid poplars, and willows are most commonly used because of their high level tolerance in growing in contaminated soil, and also because of their effectiveness. And also alder, cypress, there are many trees. Phytoremediation has been used in New Mexico too. So in Farmington, New Mexico State University students used hybrid poplars to remove petroleum from the soil there. The goal of the project was, or is still, to clean up the soil and the groundwater, and also to prevent contaminant movement from the site through creating a root barrier with the trees. And the trees have also been used to remove radionuclides from the soil. One research that was done was Pinus ponderosa and Pinus radiata, inoculated with 5 different ectomycorrhizae, were grown in strontium-90 filled soil. The most successful of the combinations accumulated 6% of the contaminant from the soil in the above ground portion of the plant just in 1 month. And other trees that are used are red maple and coconut tree, for example.
So we're nearly out of time, but I looked at fungi, and they both can hyperaccumulate toxins, meaning absorb toxins into their physical fruiting bodies, and also help remediative plants grow by attaching themselves to their roots. And so here are some things that they've been proven to absorb. And they thrive in really otherwise toxic environments, making them a really great remediator for like nuclear waste sites that would be uninhabitable to even other remediative plants. And so how we thought that this would be related to New Mexico is it's really inexpensive compared to other forms of cleanup. It's rather non-invasive as well. It's easily accessible and can be implemented on large or small scales by individuals or groups. And we think it's really exciting.
Oh, just to add that we did Skype in Dr. Warner Orozco Obando from North Carolina. He used to be in the Sustainability Studies program here, and his research focus was cleanup using the sacred lotus plant. So that's another plant that has a lot of potential.
Thank you all.
So my name's Tim, and I did a brief overview of depleted uranium testing in New Mexico and its deployment in Iraq. The nuclear age was ushered in with the detonation of Gadget at Trinity on July 16, 1945, and Gadget utilized plutonium fission. In order to acquire fission, scientists enriched uranium-238, and through the enrichment process, depleted uranium was created as a byproduct. For a period of time, it kind of just sat around as a waste product, but around the 1960s, the United States picked up an interest in testing it for anti-armor weaponry systems. Some of the characteristics that make depleted uranium attractive for these weapon systems is the fact that it's 1.7 times more dense than lead, and that it exhibits pyrophoric effects, which when the depleted uranium rounds strike their targets, they burn in a particularly violent way. And another of the attractions towards depleted uranium in testing is its wide availability through the through the enrichment process for nuclear bombs. And depleted uranium is 40% less radioactive than naturally occurring uranium, and it's not particularly a thing that is looked at as a point of interest for testing, but it is used to euphemize the negative effects of the radioactive material. In New Mexico, Sandia National Labs, which is nearby here in Albuquerque and has many testing areas in the Manzano Mountains, has done a significant amount of depleted uranium testing. And in the 90s, they established an environmental restoration project that identified 70 contaminated sites in 1993. 20 of those have been cleaned, 9 have scheduled cleanups, and 41 remain without a plan. And in August 1998, the environmental restoration project identified an additional 182 sites of soil contamination and proposed no further action for 122, while 74 require further assessment or cleanup. And in a 1999 Department of Energy statement, it was 4 sites listed at Technical Area 3 and Coyote Test Field, which are part of Sandia National Laboratories, were listed as active environmental restoration sites. Some of the ways that depleted uranium travels after it's tested at these weapons areas is like many other metals. Depleted uranium is capable of spreading through groundwater or surface waters, but a lot of the explosive tests that that depleted uranium is utilized with are capable of significant airborne dispersal. And one example of significantly long-range detected depleted uranium particles was in New York, where in 1979, Knowles Atomic Laboratory detected airborne depleted uranium from National Lead Laboratories 26 miles away. To demonstrate some of the effects of depleted uranium testing in New Mexico, the New Mexico Department of Health established a urinalysis study to compare against Center for Disease Control national study, and they found that at the 50th percentile, individuals in New Mexico saw higher levels of depleted uranium within their urine samples. And like other radioactive particles, depleted uranium, when inhaled, has the possibility of lodging itself in the lung and emitting a continuous amount of radiation. And if it is ingested, it can absorb itself into bones or bone marrow, increasing the risks of bone cancers and chances of leukemia. Depleted uranium is also capable of penetrating soft tissue, such as gonads, and increasing the probability of birth defects and spontaneous abortions. Iraq is probably the most prominent example of depleted uranium use by a state in warfare. And in 1999, the United States used 286,000 kilograms of depleted uranium, and in 2003 they used 122,000. And the A-10 Warhog and the M1A1 and the M1A2 are the primary delivery systems for depleted uranium. Studies in Iraq have shown that although the United States argues that it uses depleted uranium only for armored targets, there's evidence of use against unarmored light vehicles, buildings, and civilian infrastructure. And studies also note that incident rates of birth defects and cancers have demonstrated a significant rise over the past 2 decades. But studies that are able to correlate environmental effects with health conditions have proven notoriously difficult. And I don't have a particular solution for the use of depleted uranium in Iraq. But one thing that would indeed be helpful is more transparency on the behalf of the user states. Yeah, the United States isn't very open about its operations. And that's all I've got.
All right. Oops. All right. So I know that we're kind of going through these quickly, and we're going to do all of the Q&A at the end. We're going to bring everybody up, so maybe take notes if you've got questions or comments for the students.
Sorry? Okay, cool. Good afternoon, everyone. So the presentation you're about to see, I'm not formally a part of, but what I'm here to do is basically hand out this questionnaire because I am working currently on a project where I am taking the Sacred Trust map and the data and the features within it and attempting to create a web-based application using online mapping software, basically to make it an interactive map and also to sort of amplify and enhance some of its qualities so that it can sort of be more useful for instance, policy advocacy and education. So obviously I'm working with Joanne and Marlene, the purveyors of the map. So fill out the questionnaire at your sort of, whenever it's convenient for you. But I do ask that you put them on the little sort of table right before you, or right after you come in the entrance on the left-hand side, and they'll be collected. And if you're interested in sort of more information about the map, obviously there's the pamphlets, but you'll be updated sort of about the progress of this project. So thank you very much.
All right, our announcer's coming up. In the meantime, I'll tell you a joke. A horse walks into a bar, and the bartender says, "Why the long face?" Hey, here's our introduction.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for being here. We are Team Trust. My name is Justin Casaquito. I am from the Pueblo of Jemez. And alongside with me, joining me today, we have Stephen Boyd, Riho Inagaki, and Diane Huckabee Harper. For our project, we focused on the Sacred Trust Map of New Mexico, which was developed and initiated by Joan Brown as well as Marlene Perot. Hope I said that right. One round of applause for them. Good job. And others as well.
They're single and looking.
That's good. Okay, we all have personal ties to our part of the project. Since I'm from Jemez Pueblo, I focused on Los Alamos. Stephen focused on uranium mining in the Navajo Dinétah Land Nation. And Riho focused on the Trinity site, and Diane focused on Southeast, the WIP site of New Mexico, and the Four Corners region, Northwest New Mexico. And next slide. So, as you know, the Los Alamos was established in 1943. The one main purpose was to create an atomic bomb. And in the summer of 1945, they detonated it at the Trinity site, which Riho will have more to share with you, under the advising of Robert Oppenheimer. And the most areas affected are Santa Fe County, the Chama and Espanola valleys, as well as the pueblos of Okeowinge, Capowinge, Bajo, Dambe, Picaries, Taos, and Powak. The Llano has always been a big concern, but it's been a bigger concern ever since the Sierra Grande fire. And since it's on Pajarito Plateau, most of the runoff goes down into the canyons. And next slide. And these are the canyons that are affected by it. And this map we also got from the New Mexico Sacred Trust website. And you could also check it out there. I think you can download them as well. And there's just a lot of contaminants coming off the top of the hill, and just some of the stuff that's there is selenium and gross alpha, which can cause cancer and may cause cancer in heavy doses, which explains why a lot of the regions that are affected by the fallout and the contaminations are getting cancer. Since the start of it, a lot of people have been getting cancer, and one reason is that. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. So I'm talking about the nuclear Trinity site of New Mexico and Japan. So first, or the next slide, on August 8th, 6th, and 9th, the two bombs was dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, respectively. Then there are over 400. The next slide, over 480,000 people were killed by the bombs, and it also contaminated the bomb site, and many people are suffer from the health issues till now. Then, yeah, I am well familiar with the bomb incident because I'm Japanese. But I didn't realize that the nuclear testing was taking place here in New Mexico. Then the connection between New Mexico and Japan inspired me to research Trinity site. This Trinity, the nuclear testing was taking place with kept secrecy to residents of New Mexico. Then, as a result, evacuation was not conducted. Then 40,000 people were exposed to radioactivity. Then even after 72 years after, many people are taking action and raising awareness of their health issues, and also seeking compensation by the government. Then through this research, I realized that the problem of radioactivity is happen in different places in different countries, but the goal we have to solve is the same. Then when I look at the current situation, the nuclear powers are still more promoted in Japan, unfortunately, and also in the U.S. many nuclear weapons are used in U.S. today. So I strongly believe that there is a high time to understand we need to work together to make better solutions. That's all.
Since we're down at time constraints, we're gonna do a testimonial. Let me start out with a joke first. No, I'm just kidding. When I was a little kid, there's a uranium mine called Blackjack Mine No. 1, and it produced 1.4 million tons of uranium, and so much so that it had its own airfield. And my dad, he worked at Kerr McGee Mine, which is all know tied in with the Church Rock Mine, and this is going to be a little snippet of him talking about it. Okay, let me tell you that joke. No, I'm just kidding. So a rabbi, a priest, and an Indian walk into a bar. Oh, I just made that joke up. Yes, there you go. All right. I was trying to remember that. I would have got it. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Well, let's start. Sorry for yelling at me.
Don't think we were never told outright the danger from radiation, and from the mine in Snowflake to when I was working at for Current B, starting in 1979, we were never told, you know, in so many words about the radiation. We were told that we needed to wear a shirt to the ground, we needed to wear a long sleeve shirt preferably. At the time, they were really into safety. Before that, and safety was not the priority, I know that. And we were never, even at the end, we were never told about the dangers of radiation. It was never put out. You know, we were told that certain areas of the mine underground were off limits because there was no moving air. Moving air apparently lessened the impact of the radiation. So we were only allowed to go to moving air, and where we worked, workstations.
Yeah, he goes on to talk more about it. If you want to see the full video, it's on my Tinder profile, so swipe right, please.
So I did the Four Corners area with the gas buggy. That was an experiment that was a prelude to fracking. And then I did the southeastern corner, and we have a testimony from Juan. He works with SWAP, and he grew up in Hobbs.
Why did the skeleton cross the road? Because he had no guts.
No.
They're not all winners.
Your name?
Hello, my name is Juan Reynosa. I am the Environmental Justice Organizer here at Southwest Organizing Project, and I'm also from Hobbs, New Mexico, where I grew up for the first 20 years of my life. I still have tons of family up there, or down there, and I live up here in Albuquerque now, but I still go down there quite a bit.
Okay, and what is your experience? What kind of toxin experience in that part of New Mexico?
I think Hobbs probably has a slew of everything from dairy, definitely oil and gas. We were just talking about a lot of chemical plants down there. And, you know, some of the uranium enrichment starts going down there right now. But my personal experience is, as I told you, my grandfather did work in this big chemical plant as I grew up, and he did get cancer. And I've always attributed to him working there, you know, poor working conditions, not good equipment, you know, for him just breathing it in. He wasn't a smoker, but he died of lung cancer. So I see a lot of that in the work that I do nowadays with a lot of folks who have respiratory issues but don't smoke. And so there's that. I've had some friends.
Okay, and that's a little snippet. The main objective we had in our project was to enhance the sacred map. And hopefully we're working towards people can upload their own testimonials to the map where they're located. That was the main objective. Oh, yay! There is also additional maps. If someone didn't get a map, there are some outside too.
Hi guys, thank you so much for being here to listen to our presentations this afternoon. My name is Lauren and this is Juliet. I'm not Juliet. And as environmental science majors, we really wanted to look at the ways that the nuclear industry has impacted water quality in the state of New Mexico and throughout the Southwest. So that's what this presentation is about.
3 issues we considered to be really important to our water in New Mexico are uranium mining, improper storage and disposal of waste, and weapons testing fallout. As a part of our project, Lauren and I wanted to offer you this interactive tool, which is loading, so that you could learn about not only these problems, but also possible solutions, background information, and as well as connect you to your local and your global nuclear resources. So this presentation will be posted on the Nuclear New Mexico website so that you can go back and access it later.
Got any jokes? Why? Go through it? Okay. So our presentation is still loading, and as it's doing that, we'll just continue on with it. So as Juliet mentioned, 3 of the major issues we wanted to focus on were mining, which can cause acid mine drainage, improper storage and waste disposal, which can cause radionuclides and hard trace elements to leach out into nearby groundwater and surface water. And then lastly, we wanted to look at how improper storage and waste disposal can cause problems and fallout as well. Yes, nuclear fallout from detonated bombs. Okay, so here in the southwestern United States, acid mine drainage is a major problem. And that's because there's so many abandoned uranium mines here. Basically, acid mine drainage, it's also referred to as acid rock drainage, and that's, it comes about due to the mixing of heavy metals with water and air, and that forms net acidity, which causes an orange-looking water, which leaches out of the mines, and oftentimes has a pH of 4 or lower, which is similar to that of battery acid. So as you can imagine, that has major impacts on the health of the environment and all those who are impacted. Okay. Hopefully it'll load so we can show you all the pictures and things. Yeah. So another major issue in the state is fallout. And so when bombs are detonated, and there's been a lot of detonated bombs here in New Mexico, especially at Trinity sites, the radionuclides attach to suspended particles in the air. They shoot up into the stratosphere, and trade winds carry the radionuclides to places as far away as New York or Michigan or even different countries. And when the fallout lands in the water and it's ingested, it has major impacts on the body. There's a couple radionuclides, I totally forget their names because they're ridiculously long, very scientific, so I would have them up here to read off for you. But the radionuclides end up in various parts of your body. So some will end up in your bones, which can cause your bones to become really frail and break. Others will end up in your kidneys. So depending on the type of radionuclides that you ingest, it ends up in various parts of your body and has various impacts on your body. And if more than a certain quantity of radionuclides are ingested, your cells can actually die. And lastly, another problem is improper storage and waste disposal. And here in our own backyard at the mixed waste landfill, that's been a huge problem. For the last 5 decades, stormwater has pooled into the unlined pits and trenches at the mixed waste landfill. And recently, since I think 1989, scientists have actually detected heavy metals such as chromium and nickel, cadmium, in nearby wells and surface waters. And additionally, at the mixed waste landfill, they covered it with dirt, which has actually accelerated the leaching of these heavy metals and radionuclides into the water. Fortunately, though, there are some solutions, as a previous group, the first group actually went in to discuss, and Juliet's going to continue on with that.
Yeah, so you heard a lot about phytoremediation, and I focused on phyto, bio, and microremediation. And when you go onto the Nuclear New Mexico website and you go see this tool, there'll be a solutions category. And there are examples of 2 different types of grasses that can extract cesium-137 as well as strontium-90, which are both byproducts of nuclear fusion. And there are examples of different kinds of bacteria that have been already found in uranium mines in Germany. Oh, okay. Well, you can see some of it. So that's great. And these are being experimented on and are pretty hopeful right now. This bacteria in particular can be used in a water filter designed by Kay Pullman, a microbiologist in Germany, to filter out uranium ions as water is passed through it. Microremediation with fungus is becoming more exciting. We found it in Chernobyl already, so that's a big possibility. I'll just keep going. We wanted to offer you more, though, besides just these scientific backgrounds. Yeah, this is from Danae No Nukes. I'm about to just gush on you. So if you want to know about radiation, it's really confusing and hard to find information, so Danae No Nukes has an awesome resource page, and we included a video on how to figure out, or how we measure radiation. 5 laws and policies that are really helpful for knowing your environmental background, what is affecting these laws, and educating yourself on those. Uranium mining in your area, if you want to know what the EPA is doing to clean up these mines, if you want to know about radiation monitoring from Danae No Nukes, also the RECA, Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, there's information on that. If you want to report an environmental violation or emergency, links and reports. If you've heard about the proposed depleted uranium plant headed for Hobbs, contact them, let them know what you think. If you want to contact your port authorities to understand how waste is getting transported through your town, if you want to know what WIP is doing to how they're transporting their waste, and an international perspective from the World Nuclear Association. Then, if you want to know about water quality reports, we've included links to past water quality reports for Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Las Cruces. Although they're the major cities on the Rio Grande, they're not the only water that's been impacted, so it's just a start. And then to really get you going, because we felt after we learned all this information, it kind of sets heavy on your heart and you need some help figuring out what to do. So find out who your local representatives are and your federal representatives. Let them know what you're thinking, what you want. This is the EPA mission statement, so you know what they're supposed to be doing for you and the regions that we lie under. That's, gotta know everything. DOE, these are the departments locally and federally, and then awesome international and local anti-nuclear organizations like ICANN. I have to say they just won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 for their work on the UN Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which passed and is now international. Danae No Nukes, link to their awesome stickers and their awesome work. And the Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety, you heard from Joni earlier. They're amazing. And Los Alamos Study Group, and then also thanks to the Nuclear Issues Study Group.
And lastly, we want to thank you guys all for your patience getting this to load. And also we want to thank our Professor Eileen for all of her support and guidance throughout this project. So thank you.
Check 1, 2. All right. Well, I just wanted to say again, that we're grateful that we get to kind of share what we've been doing all semester long with you all. This is valuable experience for these students to get to participate in the sharing of ideas, because ultimately that's what this university is about. That's what education is sharing ideas and information. And this information in particular is, I feel, is vitally important, right? Because it really involves human health and future generations. Okay, I don't need to talk as long. So anyway, thanks for being here.
And then also in Isla Pueblo, which I know people use this water for ceremonial purposes.
How does it show it? Did it highlight wrong? So the Lobo Gardens is northeast of campus, and it's very important because it oh, is it up yet? So the objective of Lobo Gardens is up there, and it's is to provide the University of New Mexico students, faculty, and staff with opportunities to experiment with projects like the one we're doing right now, and Christian Holberg, the coordinator of Lobo Gardens, was very important in this. She's the coordinator of Lobo Gardens, and she's also the one that approved this project when we just started it out. Just keep on talking. So each year in New Mexico, billions of gallons of runoff taken with trash, nutrients, metals, and other pollutants go through the waterways, and it's very important that we combat this by building an acequia. That's an acequia to divert the water, to divert the water in a helpful way to grow plants and all the other to the garden way, and also the equipment was also located in this area, which was very helpful. And yeah.
So our project, has anyone ever been to Lobo Gardens, the Red Gardens? It's pretty cool. It's a kind of like a sacred space. Well, as you know, there's an alley, and our goal is to divert the stormwater runoff coming down the alley because there's that steady slope into the gardens. So here's some pictures of before the project and how the gardens looked before. And then the second slide, we have some stakes, some markers of where we were planning to dig. Okay, yeah. No. And then that's just like during the first project or the first work day, we have 3 actually. So we were digging, leveling out the ground, a lot of work. And then this is what it looks like now. So we've made a really big improvement. And after we dug the swales, we lined it with composted soil so that hopefully in the spring we can do some phytoremediation and, give nutrients back to the soil. And then we lined it with mulch and then gravel and then larger rocks to help form the swales. Yeah. And then if anyone's interested, we have our last work day tomorrow at the Lobo Gardens from 11 to 4. And there's going to be fruit. So bring your own water. Okay. And that's all.
No. But I think I'm supposed to talk in this one, right? Hi, everyone. My name is Amelia, and I'm in the Nuclear New Mexico class. And I'm here to talk to you today about radioactive terrorism in New Mexico, our issues then and now. So I wanted to include just a bit of prerequisites. So I think it's important to address the fact that the nuclear industry and tackling it and dismantling the nuclear beast is it requires an interdisciplinary approach. So we need backgrounds in science, sociological, and environmental backgrounds to really tackle this. And I focus certainly on a sociological aspect today. So a basic background of environmental racism is environmental racism occurs when communities of color are disproportionately exposed or disproportionately targeted, deliberately targeted to environmental harm. And so this is not limited to nuclear issues by any means. However, the nuclear industry is certainly a huge perpetrator of this. And it's usually indigenous peoples who are intentionally targeted and for their resources. So an understanding of nuclearism, coined by Robert Lifton, and also understanding the 4 principles of nuclearism outlined by Nader and Gusterson. All of these are involved in the issue that I'm going to be talking to you about today, which include government secrecy, mass numbing of public, civilians, and armed forces, othering, and nuclear colonialism, and I will be focusing on nuclear colonialism. So a history of nuclear colonialism is, there's so much, but one of the major examples is colonial powers often testing informally colonized territories surrounding indigenous people usually. So like the US and the Pacific Islands and Britain with Australia. And in fact, because of issues like this, nuclear New Mexico is designated and oftentimes called a sacrifice zone, in the sense that our land and our people are sacrificed at the hands of nuclearism. So nuclearism in New Mexico, we have already gotten a look at the Sacred Trust map. There's a huge one out displayed there, and you should definitely take a look at it. It's beautiful, and it illustrates just all of the issues that we have here that are threatening our sacred water, air, and land, which include, but are certainly not limited to, uranium mining, coal mines, accidental releases from petroleum tanks, WIPP, which is the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, sites contaminated with depleted uranium and other hazardous materials. And so some facts on the nuclear energy industry.
Waste is created from the creation of nuclear energy is considered high-level waste, and it's extremely dangerous and will continue to be radioactive for up to hundreds of thousands of years. Since its inception, commercial energy industry creates the same amount of waste in 6 years from the entirety of the waste created by the nuclear weapons industry. So every 6 years, we are generating the same amount of waste since 1944? Five? So the next big act and I guess just a symbolism of power and expression of power that we're facing here in New Mexico. I'm sure we've talked a little bit about it in this conference, but to really get into it now is the Holtec and Eddie Lee Energy Alliance, both corporations, plan on building a depository in southeast New Mexico, which if proposals were to move forward, could contain high-level radioactive waste from commercial productions in the US. All of the commercial waste from the US that have ever been created since its inception. The Southwest Alliance to Save Our Futures / Alliance for Environmental Strategies is working on this issue, and this is where I pulled a lot of my information. So some information on, I'm working with them on this issue, and that's why this is my final project, my working on them with this issue. Some information on the proposed site. So the proposed site will contain 100,000 metric tons of high-level nuclear waste. The waste will be held in a facility only temporarily, it said, 120 years max, it said. However, this could lead to a de facto permanent site, and also this could lead to them not building it. And I mean, there's no way to correctly store nuclear waste, but this could lead to like not having correct even standards if there's such a thing, because it's a temporary site, as they're claiming it to be. So the proposed construction would begin in 2020, and if the NRC approves the license, waste would travel across the nation for at least 20 years. That's how much waste there is, and it would be traveling across our lands for 20 years. So licensing is currently illegal under the Nuclear Waste Act policy of 1982, but there are many bills trying to change this. So please be on the lookout for that. So this is what the storage system looks like, and these are all of my sources that I'm getting from my previous slides and my next slides. I just wanted kind of a visual there. So the proposed ground system with thin wall stainless steel canisters would be used as untested and has not been approved by the NRC. Each thin wall is 1/2 inch, whereas other countries right now are using about 20 inches, and that still does not suffice. And each stainless steel canister holds nearly as much radioactive cesium, 137, as was released in Chernobyl. So the president of Holtec actually admitted in this video, this will be up on the Nuclear New Mexico site as well, that there's no way to repair these canisters, even if there were a microscopic crack to occur, in which case millions of radionuclides would be released. So we have the president of Holtec telling us this. Actually, on San Onofre Safety, there's also an article that has shown that Holtec canisters have already failed in the past, and there's like no excuse. So why is this environmental racism? So this is a map of all of the nuclear reactors and power plants in our country. And if you notice something, New Mexico does not have one of those. This is just such an overt and disgusting expression of racism and power to me, because we have no ties to the nuclear energy industry. And yet it is coming from these East Coast power plants, 100 metric tons they're proposing to bring to our state across the nation, into our backyards where we're already dealing with so many issues. We already have WIP, and they want to bring it because we are in a poor, impoverished community with people of color. And finally, I just want to say that we are having a summit on December 9th, next Saturday. I want to point out Lon Burnham, former representative from Texas, and Karen Haddon, who are leading this, along with many others, who are leading this. And we're going to be talking, this is going to be primarily a planning summit, and we could really use your help. It's focused on creating action plans because we really need to figure out what we're going to do about this issue, because this issue will affect every single one of us. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Abby. My class project is titled The Woke Teenager, Nuclear New Mexico Edition. So what I've done is basically ended up with a 2 to 3 hour intensive workshop, kind of condensing most of the content that we've learned in our Nuclear New Mexico class into something that for teenagers. To engage them. So my mission is to engage these guys, to wake them up and give them the information that they need. Yeah, those guys. So it's kind of a tough audience to actually engage, and I really put a lot of emphasis on truly engaging them and not just, handing out worksheets or something boring, but really, giving them information in a way that they understand it and are engaged. So my method was to use artwork and YouTube videos, because that's the language that they speak. To really, kind of harness and direct their curiosity and creativity, and start some conversations with our youth. This is just a collage of all of the artwork that was selected by middle schoolers as interesting pieces. And what I did was kind of just build lessons around those, around the pieces that they already wanted to know more about. So my process was to, which is kind of hard, to let them just select what they're interested in, because I kept seeing myself trying to guide their choices, and I had to kind of just back out and see what they wanted to learn about. Yes. And I think by doing that and letting them kind of pick the pieces that they were interested in, automatically they're going to be a little more engaged because they're deciding what they're learning about. These are some of the pieces and some of the questions that they had. Why are they holding up their hand? Why are there bats? Why are they wearing a gas mask? Why are the bats yellow? What are these big spikes? Where is this? Is this a real place? Why are there dead roadrunners? What is Vaughn? Is that nuclear waste on the truck, and how is it transported, and is it safe? What's with that fence? Did they knock it down? Was it already down? What is Yucca Mountain? Why does that thing have like 7 toes? They're really questions anybody could have when looking at these pieces. So some of the topics and themes that are covered through kind of explaining about these pieces of artwork are nuclear weapons testing in the Southwest and in the Marshall Islands, differing perspectives of the same event. So we, like I said, there's tons of videos throughout the whole workshop. They're generally pretty short, from 5 to maybe 20 minutes long at the very most. And so we watched the Bikini Atoll video from a kind of military perspective, and then also watched Nuclear Savage, which is kind of the opposite, a different perspective, the opposite perspective. And also there's kind of talking about the current environmental conditions where the testing has taken place. Nuclear waste storage and containment, these kind of pieces all had to do with that. Permanent marking systems to signify danger to future generations and species at the WIP site. That's definitely really a fun topic, I think, to engage like some teenagers in, because they have all that creativity. The activism that has kept Yucca Mountain from opening, there's some videos about that and a tour, and also some of the current conditions and budget proposals that may be funding the continuation of and opening of Yucca Mountain. One of my favorites, definitely to engage teenagers, is the Ray Cat solution. So for those of you that don't know about that, it's I have notes that are shorter. So it basically is a two-part solution that consists of breeding cats that turn color when exposed to radiation. And the second one is to kind of immortalize these cats in song and legend and folklore and pass down the knowledge to generations about these cats' powers to warn of extreme danger. Oh no, what happened? Okay. Ray cats, yes. It's pretty fun, pretty crazy. Okay. So the next theme was really the use of art as the use and need for art, and the local art and murals as a form of activism. There's some interviews that we found kind of with, Fragua Dodi and Montano, who did this really cool art mural that's kind of in the Nob Hill area, and also some interviews with Patrick Nagatani, because I did notice that like 4 or 5 of the pieces that were selected were his work. So this is my conclusion. Basically, my conclusion is that teens they have the energy, curiosity, and creativity to take on these issues. They just really haven't been given the tools and information they need. Due to the conditions that they're inheriting, I feel like we owe it to them to give them accurate information so that they can start working on some creative solutions. I also think that changing the way that we're presenting information to youth is needed. Society has changed, kids have changed, and I think that the way that we're presenting information to them really hasn't changed enough. And that's pretty much it. The next page is my, I have a lot of sources because I really didn't, I was inspired. This project, I was inspired by my son as part of this project because he's a middle schooler, and every day, like, I kind of was seeing that they're not really being given accurate information. They're not really being engaged in ways that are interesting to them. So I was inspired, and when I talk about my test subject or target population, I mean my son and his friends. So this is tested, and I have been told that it is cool. So, okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm hijacking this for just a second. So I just forgot to mention, please, if you have any questions about the summit or the issue itself, we do have a booth outside, and you're welcome to come up and talk to us about it.
All right, guys. So I'm going to try to get through this because we're almost out of time, and I'm the last presentation. So my name's Justin, and what I wanted to look at is sort of historical factors and what led Los Alamos to exist in the place that it does, and also to what kind of happened and the effects of it. So to start off, I wanted to go into like the history of the area, the Pajarito Plateau, and so the first known settlement of the area was in around 1175, in between 1175 and 1250 AD. And the first people that were there were they migrated from present-day Arizona, and they spoke Karis, so they were believed to be the ancestors of the Cochiti people, or maybe San Felipe or Santa Ana. And then, so some droughts happened, so then they had to move away. But then in 1300, a second group came from Chaco Canyon in New Mexico and Mesa Verde, New Mexico, and they spoke Tewa, so they were descendants of the San Ildefonso. And so, and then hundreds of years later, when the Spanish came, they came to the area, but they didn't actually come up to the plateau until about the 18th century when the new settlers came, and they sort of challenged the indigenous people there through land grants. And then eventually Anglos acquired the lands. They fought the Spanish with the land grants, and then they opened a boys' school soon after in 1917, which housed a lot of the scientists during the Manhattan Project. But then in 1948, the government took control of the boys' school and also the area under the War Powers Act, and they transferred it into a top-secret military facility for the Manhattan Project. So one of the factors definitely that led to all this is nuclearism, and as was kind of mentioned before, there's four major factors that Robert J. Lifton sort of laid out that of nuclearism, and there's mass numbing and secrecy, which is definitely important, but the two I was really looking at was othering and nuclear colonialism, because there were people there were people on the Pajaro Plateau that had been living there for centuries, and the U.S. government basically just removed them and went about their experiments with basically no second thought. And I think that was kind of because there was a history of violence and sort of not really caring about them with the U.S. government and indigenous people, because ever since the Europeans had arrived, there's been a long history of violence. They tried to eradicate them, and then eventually, as a sort of supposed way to coexist, created boarding schools, but that was sort of not the best way to do it, because what they did in boarding schools is they tried to assimilate them, which they took them from their culture and then tried to basically have them act as European men. They cut their hair and they gave them European names like John and Will, and actually that picture is a picture of my great-grandfather John, who spent some time at the Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, and they wanted him to play football there because he was a pretty good athlete. And then, so one of the things that they said a lot about boarding schools was kill the Indian, save the man, because they didn't want them to be Indians. They didn't want them to have their culture, and they wanted them to be Europeans. And then another factor, which I think played a huge role in Los Alamos existing the way that it does, is manifest destiny, and which it's kind of a thing that began in around 1850 that the Europeans of the U.S. Sort of came up with, and it was the idea that the westward expansion of the whole continent was inevitable, and it was sort of like a God-given right to them. And it sort of came up before the Civil War when the Oregon Territory was acquired, and then during the Civil War it was kind of put on the back burner because of the war, but it was kind of revitalized in after that because of when Alaska was purchased, but it definitely hit the height of its prominence in U.S. foreign policy in the 1890s, which was kind of led into the land grants being acquired by the Anglos and the boys' school being built in 1917. So now, today, like I kind of mentioned earlier, San Ildefonso Pueblo is right next to Los Alamos and the facilities there, and I just wanted to focus on a couple things that has affected the Pueblo. So there's a huge fire in the area in the year 2000, and some concerns of that were the fumes, obviously from the smoke, but then obviously the radionuclides in the area that were from all the testing could be airborne and could cause cancer and many other health problems, like has been mentioned before. And then also there's a facility where they keep a lot of the waste, and it's pictured up there. It's called Area G, and it's actually a huge hazard because if there was another fire, then a very bad accident could happen. And what's kind of scary is it's actually larger than WIP in the amount of waste it contains, and which is 1.4 billion barrels of waste to the 55-gallon barrels. And it's from weapon waste only, so this is a huge amount of waste, but it's only from the facility in Los Alamos, which is really scary to think about how much of waste is out there still. And that's all I had. There's my sources.
All right, let's bring up all the students here. Everybody can come up and we can line up here. Maybe we can all just, line up here. What? Oh yeah, well, let's turn the lights on. So we have just a couple minutes maybe for some questions that came up for the students. Okay, Diane, can we get a microphone over there?
Does that work? On the bioaccumulation and the bioremediation, something I've always wanted to know, and I never ever saw an answer, maybe you saw, what happens then when you've got radioactive bacteria and trees and plants? After it absorbs the radioactivity, then what? Come towards the mic.
I can switch places.
That one.
A lot of the time, depending on the method of remediation used by the plant and like the plant contaminant relationship, the plants then have to be treated as and disposed as nuclear hazardous waste.
The question is, how is that done? I'm taking stack guys, so Smitty's next, and then I'll do the next. In one study I found with fungi, they harvested the mushrooms as if it was hazardous waste, and they burned it, caught the ash like in a contained, I don't know, system, and they were able to store it in sheets of glass. So then it was easier to transport and actually like not as in like ash or yeah. That was just one study, I guess.
Can I add something to that? When I did this project, I was pretty excited about it at the beginning, but by the end I was like, not the best panacea, because there's issues. The plant is contaminated, you have to treat it as hazardous, bring it to a hazardous waste site. But something we ran into that was pretty exciting was when it's broken down and it's no longer toxic. That's exciting.
I was not going to talk again, but radionuclides don't break down. Whatever chemicals can break down, but you still have radionuclides. If you burn it, it goes out in the air.
Yeah, this was petroleum.
Okay.
That I was referring to.
Should we get Smitty's question?
Yeah.
So I wanted to compliment y'all. This is really cool. This is another follow-up to the plant uptake question. I've been able to read about the fire around Los Alamos and the increased radioactivity in the streams after the whole order of magnitude higher than before. And the question is, when we were talking about plant uptake and all that, is so how do you manage all of that waste, all of that ash? And with climate change, what are we going to do? Y'all are the experts in that.
Who wants to take that one?
I got a wireless here. Easier.
It's not the only solution is to stop making waste.
Question here.
What legislatures are going to be?
Sorry. Here. Okay, sorry. We got a question here, and then we're going to come. Joni? Okay, cool. If you want to, go ahead, Joni. Do you want to just jump in there?
So after the Sierra Brown fire, there were a lot of houses that burned in Los Alamos County, and the people had weird things in their garages. They had like howitzers and chemicals, unlabeled chemical bottles and things. And so the Environment Department went through and collected all of those things. But then at the same time, there was all of this ash. And so what they did is they proposed that they would put them in, they would scoop up the ash and put them in burritos, quote unquote burritos, that were lined, plastic lined, in the back of dump trucks. And then they would wrap them up, the ash in plastic, and then they would take the waste over to Mora, to the wagon house, dump special waste dump. And that's what they did with the ash.
So moving it around. There was a question here.
Yes, we know we have a problem. And the problem is not going to go away until we confront the people who are allowing this stuff to happen. So what kind of representatives are going to be invited to this symposium? That's what I need. I would really like to know if we can not just open the doors and sit here and talk about it all day long till we're blue in the face, but to actually show them that we're awake and we need to do something about this.
So yeah, we agree with you 100%. And there's this symposium is actually all about taking action. We've got pledge cards that we want everybody to sign on your way out, and I think they should be in your packets there. We're planning multiple actions, and we're, with the legislative session coming up, with this current administration, we have an uphill battle in many ways with a lot of these issues. But we're definitely interested in taking action in all the different forms that it takes. Tomorrow we have a workshop by CLE about direct action, and we're really interested in a diversity. And so as you saw from these students, there's a lot of diversity here in approaches. We got another question over here. Oh, Lindsay first. Go ahead.
First, I want to say everybody did a wonderful job. I was really impressed with the level of knowledge that you all brought to the group today. But my question is actually directed at the woman with your concern and artistic engagement with young people. I was interested to find out about the process that you use. How did you come about creating that process? Was it kind of organic and kind of go into it with an idea?
No, I did not come into it. I did have an idea, and I found myself really trying to kind of push what I thought should be taught. And I think as soon as I kind of took myself out of that equation and let my target population / test subjects kind of start to guide that themselves, I saw more engagement. So it really, I changed my process kind of partially like through the process to really just let them kind of guide it.
We had one more question over here.
First, I'd like to go and thank everybody for going ahead and doing this as students in sustainability studies. Great. But now I want to put a challenge out to you. I'm with the Green Party, the Albuquerque metropolitan area, and I'm thinking of 2 items to bring on up before our steering committee for next sets of actions, and I want to see what the reaction is from the students. Number 1, would you be in favor of Albuquerque becoming a nuclear-free zone? Okay, I'm getting yes? Okay, all right, so there's one good one, and perhaps we should all get together then to make that happen. There's one. Second one is, we have a plutonium fabrication facility up in Los Alamos they want to reopen. How far will you go to go and put yourself on the line to march up there and show the world that maybe this is something we need to do here? Is it's started here, we ended here.
Anybody want to comment on that?
So
yeah, we actually had a conversation a little bit earlier about how you just recently reached out to Tim Keller, asking him to speak out as to issue Albuquerque as a nuclear-free zone, and I think that that is an awesome thing to do, and I think that it's something that I would be willing to work for, and I think a lot of other people would be willing to work for, and I think that having a progressive mayor for the first time in a long time is going to be helpful for us in that battle. Of course, we have so many federal issues that would have to be addressed that are probably going to be another 4 years. But I think that, like, we have some people who are coming up in Albuquerque specifically, and I think that, like, it is possible to kind of to push for those necessary narratives. And I think that a lot of I don't really understand that narrative that, like, young people are not involved, because young people that I know are very involved. Yeah. So yeah, that's what I would have to say about that.
All right, does anybody want to say any closing comments here? All right, how about another round of applause for these students? This was their final, so they all passed. We can celebrate. All right, we are going to alter the schedule just a bit, and we're going to start at 4:50 with the next panel, which is not much of a break. You guys are all champs hanging in there with us. So go ahead and take a quick bio break while we set up the last panel, last but not least, on nuclear energy and waste. So get some food if you need to, and come on back.
Thank you, students. You guys were all good sports. Sorry to rush you. You all did great. Thank you so much.
Wi-Fi, and just everyone's probably sucking it up with their phones, and so you did great. Thank you. Sorry if I was an asshole. You did great too. Sorry if I was pressuring you.
Oh no, yeah, thanks.
You were like perfect.
Oh, thank God. I didn't have that much, so I didn't really feel rushed.
And it's easy when you're one person. You get a group, and it's
Yeah,
like
you can't really control like how fast everyone's talking. So.
Where's your grandfather from? The one that was Carlisle?
Oneida.
Okay. Yes.
It's like right by Green Bay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what are you studying here?
Communications.
Oh,
But
sweet.
my
Okay.
minor sustainability.
Are you gonna hang out for the rest?
I think I have to go. Might try to make it tomorrow.
Okay, cool, yeah, come back tomorrow. Thank you.
That's why I'm here.
Are you ready to go? Yeah. Okay. Because I'm crazy, and I got some time issues here. So, don't mic up there, point it here. We need some water. Bring some water. How many people do that? Five. So we're going to go in this order, if that's okay? Okay. So Lindsay's longer, there's more stuff, but we cut off 5 minutes at a time. So we have right now, we're going to start at 4:50, and then go to 6. So we have an hour and 10 minutes. If this is going to be 20 minutes, that's going to be
20 minutes.
yeah, but we're going to switching in between.
So maybe like,
No.
8 minutes? I don't know if they're going to be able to keep those. I talked to them about that.
So I realized if we take 10 minutes, it's not really 10 times 5 is 50. And we like, no, it's 55.
So we really just not have time for a question. Maybe like 1 or 2 questions.
They just have to know they can't hold the court to speak. The more they do, you work with Mike, so you have to hire. They have to cancel. This, they'll cancel the feedback. Checking one.
And I'm going to ask somebody to bring some water down.
Checking 1, 2, 3. Checking 1, 2, 3. Check, check, check. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Yeah, it's doing. Someone's going to do it. The best thing I do, I guess, is to rely on as most as you can with those. But
Just for being an awesome instructor. I'm not sucking up. Don't worry, I'm not sucking up. Thanks. I'm really young.
And then we get accidents where the waste, the barrels explode and the waste gets released out into the environment. So we deal with a lot of these issues, and today our panel is going to be covering a few of these issues. I'm just going to quickly introduce them. We got Lindsay Harper from Georgia WAND, Women's Action for New Directions. We have Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear. We have Diane Dorigo from Nuclear Information and Resource Services. We have Karen Haddon from the SEED Coalition, and Don Hancock from the Southwest Research and Information Center. So I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to talk about Shell Bluff.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Harper. I come to you from Atlanta, Georgia. I come to you representing Georgia WAND Education Fund. That's Georgia Women's Action for New Direction. I want to say a big thank you to Leona, to Eileen, to Cody, to everyone for welcoming me here to New Mexico and Albuquerque. This is my first time. I'm very excited to be here. And per Leona's request, the land that I'm coming from that was stolen was originally the Cherokee and the Creek. So I'm going to put that out there. So I want to tell you all about Shell Bluff, Georgia. It's a community that exists in the shadow of the nuclear industrial complex. A lot of people don't know that we do have nuclear in Georgia. So the Shell Bluff community is approximately 170 miles outside of Atlanta, Georgia. You've got the Savannah River site, which is a nuclear weapons complex on the South Carolina side of the Savannah River. And then you've got Plant Vogel, which is a commercial nuclear energy plant on the Georgia side of the Savannah River. We also call this area the Central Savannah River area, the CRSA. I also want to draw your attention to there's some green triangles up above. You see the Shell Bluff. There's also a lot of private industry that's upstream. So we've got a water source that has a lot of industry and a lot of usage from several different industries on it. I want to let you all know that the SRS, the Savannah River site, was known as the bomb plant, and nukes were created and used in the 1940s. They enriched uranium and plutonium. It was unregulated for 40 years, which is a scary thing. There was documented legacy waste in the area, and just to kind of have you all understand some of the racial dynamics, this is a while ago. Some of the black workers were actually not allowed to take their clothes off at the plant. They had to take them home, which means that this was so you can imagine, as one of our colleagues mentioned earlier, taking that stuff home and contaminating your family as well. So I just want to orient you all to kind of the dynamics at the time. Oh, and one more thing. I have some handouts I want to share with you all. It gives a brief history of Shell Bluff, and I'll share that afterwards. You all kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. There were, and there still are, unlined trenches full of waste. Once the creation of nuclear weapons became illegal, they were like, well, what are we going to do with all this nuclear stuff? Well, let's make nuclear energy. So hence that's where Plant Vogel comes in. So now you've got legacy waste, we've got documentation of tritium contamination, and so Plant Vogel is actually exacerbating the contamination that's already there because of its close proximity to SRS. And there's tritium in the water at Savannah River, and it's actually 81 times higher than the tritium that exists in the water along the Altamaha, which is where there's another plant called Plant Hatch. And there are also some indigenous communities living in that area as well. And I'll tell you a little bit more about tritium later. So Shell Bluff is a rural community. This picture at the top is a picture I took. There are a lot of dirt roads out there. The picture in the middle, I took also a lot of open fields, a lot of family farms. It's the bird dog capital of the world. They're very proud of that. There are lots of, like I mentioned before, agricultural industries. There's dairy cows, beef, cotton. You've got private industries. You've got paper mills and polymer plants that are all upstream. And just to give you an idea, according to the Georgia River Network, the Savannah River supplies drinking water to Augusta, Savannah, Georgia, Hilton Head, and Beaufort, South Carolina, and many smaller municipalities up and down the basin. And it's about 1.5 million people drink the water. People still boat, they still fish, and they still swim, and they eat the fish from the river. Georgia Power operates Plant McIntosh, which is a fossil fuel plant, which draws water from the Savannah River. The Southern Nuclear Operating Company operates Plant Vogtle, which draws water from Savannah River, and they also blow out their tanks back into the river. As of 2003, the Environmental Protection Division, EPD, has issued 464 agricultural water withdrawal permits in the Savannah River Basin. And so let me back up one more time. So Burke County, Shell Bluff is in the city of Waynesboro. The city of Waynesboro is in Burke County, Georgia. Burke County is one of the poorest counties in the state. It's an aging population. A lot of the young folks don't stay there because there's not a whole lot of opportunity. And there's a large black population, a large migrant worker population a lot of folks may not be aware of. And a lot of folks over at SRS and Plant Vogtle, there's multi-generational employment at Savannah Riverside and Plant Vogtle. So you've got several generations of folks who have relied and depended on these contaminating industries for their livelihoods. And one thing I learned at a recent Citizens Advisory Board, CAB meeting, it's a body that helps to oversee some of the things that are happening over at SRS. SRS is focusing a lot of their recruitment efforts on millennials. That's very terrifying to me. They're looking to pull in young people to have them be employed in this industry and have long careers, and so they're looking to help the area, both on the South Carolina side and the Georgia side, so it's like a live, work, play kind of a thing to attract these young folks, so just keep that in mind. So again, folks in this community are held hostage. There aren't a lot of opportunities, and this area, CRSA, is downwind and downstream from the industries that I mentioned before, the fossil fuels, and the nuclear plants as well. So, to give you an idea, so some of our partners, one of our partners is the U.S. Human Rights Network, and we were able to serve on the Human Rights Network, a Human Right to Water Coalition. That's this blue graphic on the left-hand side. And Shell Bluff is considered the third, Savannah River is considered the third dirtiest river in the U.S. And let's see, we also were able to participate in the Organization of American States, it's the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, IACHR, testimony for the UN Special Rapporteur on Sanitation and Water. We were also highlighted in the infographic I just mentioned. Bernice Howard Johnson is seen here testifying. She has also went into very important meetings at the Capitol, at the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and the DOE. Annie Laura Howard Stevens is one of our community elders. You can see also a picture outside of her church, which is Fairfield Baptist Church. Many of her family members are buried there, and this is very, very close to her heart. She's been doing this work for 40 years. And we also have Miss Claire Dalbert, who actually recently passed this year. She was the first person. She actually used to live on River Road, which is the road that goes right in front of Plant Vogtle. And she was the first board member on Georgia 1 from the area, and we were very sad that we lost her this year, but she was very strong in her leadership, and we definitely want to say that the voices of these women and other people who are living on the front lines have increased awareness about what's going on, and as a result, there have been some wins toward making change. So at the top, because of the leadership from the women in the community, the EPA actually came down and visited Shell Bluff in the fall of 2016. You can see here a picture of our executive director, Becky Rafter, and our community elder, Annie Laura Howard Stevens, speaking and educating some of the officials that came down to let them know what's really going on in Shell Bluff. And what has also come from that is Georgia 1 was able to negotiate a 3-year participatory monitoring program. We call it the Radionuclide Educational Monitoring and Outreach Project. We call it the REMOP, which is to help educate the community about some basics, kind of get a baseline knowledge. And they're also offering voluntary testing of soil and water. Once they get the results, they're going to then re-educate people about what was found. It's a small win. It's better than nothing. It's not perfect, but we have to start somewhere. Our partner in that is the Savannah River Ecology Lab. They're supposed to be an independent partner, and they exist on the site of the Savannah River site. One thing that we've noticed in many of our meetings, we have community talks every month that are based on particular themes. We have a year-long curriculum. But one thing that everybody is asking in every meeting, are y'all coming to find out what's going on with all the cancer that everybody's getting? Yes, for sure. So I just want to let you all know, I told you I was going to tell you a little bit about tritium a little bit later. So tritium is the isotope used to keep our deployed nuclear weapons current and viable. It has a short half-life, about 12 years. And so in order to have our nuclear weapons on deck and ready to go, we have to continually reprocess it. Where do they do that? At the Savannah River site. And so one thing that's really scary to think about is that actually they have tripled the tritium production at the Savannah River site. So we're talking about genocide here, folks. Okay, we've already got documented tritium contamination in the area, and they're tripling it now. And when we talk about, a lot of people talk about, okay, North Korea, it's over there, but that's in Georgia. The people in Georgia and South Carolina are directly affected by those kinds of decisions. And so I wanted this. You'll find this in the handout that I give to you all about the history of Shell Bluff. But when Georgia Power did their site, they're looking to where they're going to build Plant Vogtle. Apparently, they understood that there were already a community of people there. It was on a fall line. It was the site of a Native American burial ground. And apparently, there are dinosaur bones there as well. And it's also on top of an important underground aquifer, the Floridan, but they chose that site anyway. Yeah, something to think about. So the Public Service Commission is, it's a body that regulates the telecommunications, electric, and natural gas for people in Georgia. And they're having a series of hearings. Just so you know, the PSC has already approved a cost overrun of $2.9 billion on a price tag that was already $14 billion. And I don't know if you all are familiar, but the Westinghouse and Toshiba, it was a big fiasco. Westinghouse went under. This is an international thing. It was a really, really big deal. And actually, the DOE has actually just approved another $3.7 billion in loan guarantees for the project. So when you think about, you've got international funding, you've got national funding, you've got clients, and I'll tell you, customers also paying on their bills every month for this, and then you've also got, I'm sorry, lost my place. You've got four different types of funding for one energy source that is super, super contaminating the area. I don't think any financial planner would advise anyone's portfolio to look like this. So I mentioned to you that Georgia Power customers are paying the QIP, the construction work in progress fee that's added on to their bills. So even if the reactor does not go online, customers are paying for it all over Georgia. The community is being contaminated by it. And we think instead the money should be going towards renewable energy, ensuring quality of life, well-paid jobs, job training, relocation, and robust severance packages in school and child care subsidization, and support for local plant workers who will be displaced after construction is over. This is like a long-term, short-term job that they have. And we also learned that a lot of the skills that these workers have don't necessarily translate into renewable energy industries. So we need to train these folks so they continue providing for their families. We learned also that the state of Georgia is the second most apocalyptic state in the nation. Something to think about with like flooding and ice and all these kinds of things. And so, we don't need to have this level of contamination. We don't need to have this level of production in an area that is prone, and we know it's going to be bad in the future. So we really need to be careful about what we're doing. I also found that on Reuters, U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry believes that the nuclear power rescue helps national security. So, right, nuclear power equals national security. Annie Laura Howard Stevens, I mentioned her to you all before, always talks about the spirit of humanity and that nuclear knows no color and we are all in danger. So the way that we define safety and security: healthy people in the environment, equitable development, increased use of conflict resolution techniques, green and sustainable jobs, access to healthy food, transportation, and energy, research and development into development and improvement of renewable technologies, increased federal spending on human services and education, instead of what I just showed you before. It sounds pretty ridiculous when you when you lay it out like that. So our mission statement is to educate the public and opinion leaders about the need to reduce violence and militarism in society and redirect excessive military spending to unmet human and environmental needs. And I hope that I have helped do that today. The reason the excessive military spending results in state violence and what that violence really looks like is it's enacted by the state or its subsidiary bodies, for example, the police and security forces or care institutions. It's also supported by leverage of nuclear weapons to suppress and control people here at home and in other parts of the world. And it's also supported by federal government's heavy prioritization of tools of violence like the military. So I think we can find a better way to spend our money, don't y'all think? Yeah, I think so. So, real quick, these are the intersectional issues at hand. We've got ruralism, racism, sexism, environmental justice, which includes climate justice, clean energy, and like I mentioned before, there are indigenous peoples also along the Altamaha. One thing I did not have on here is that this is a reproductive justice issue. For those of y'all who don't know, women and children absorb 40 to 60, are negatively affected 40 to 60% more than men. And so this is a gendered violence issue as well. This is about safety and security, and it's really about our spending values at the end of the day. Briefly, I just want to show you all some pictures. This is the most recent pictures Georgia Power put out for construction of Plant Vogtle. You can look at that really briefly. The next slide, I'm going to talk about it before I go to it, but over half the discretionary budget goes towards the military. And so, again, what does that look like in Georgia? It looks like an area, Shell Bluff, that's oversaturated with federal funds. You've got the Savannah River site, it's contaminating. You've got Plant Vogtle, it's contaminating. It's a contaminated environment. But then you've got places in Atlanta that are starved for resources. Historically black communities that have been, paved over for the Turner Stadium and for the Turner Baseball Stadium and other things as well. So we really need to be mindful and have public management of public funds and equitable decision-making processes, for sure. So this is one of the images that we're using to kind of initiate the conversation with folks, all the things we could be spending our money on and what we're actually spending our money on. And I just want to let you know that we have grown. Our Georgia One staff, so the two ladies on the either end, Natalie Harrington and Janie Hill Scott, are our new generation of leaders in the area. We're very excited to have them on board. And we have Layla Zaneb, we have Emily Wayrock, myself, and Becky Rafter. And we literally just had the staff retreat on Monday and Tuesday of this past week. So we're really excited to be able to, again, come here and share our stories with you all. And I'm really looking forward to connecting with a lot more folks. I see some connections to be made in this room. So thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions, come talk to me.
All right, next we'll have Kevin Camps from Beyond Nuclear. He is from DC.
Thank you, Cody. So I am doing an overview of atomic reactors, and I have way too many slides, so I'm really going to fly through them. Greed and power is behind this. There's a lot of different reactor designs. The biggest one is pressurized water reactors. That's 2/3 of our reactors in the country. The other 1/3 is boiling water reactors. Companies like Westinghouse are on the PWR. Companies like General Electric on the boiling water reactor side. Way too many reactors, and new ones they want to build, like Lindsay just mentioned in Georgia. So I wanted to mention this because we're down the road from Sandia, that back on August 8th, 2005, the Energy Policy Act was signed into law at Sandia. So you got President George W. Bush, you got both senators from New Mexico, and the Department of Energy, as Lindsay just indicated, and you look at the budget every year, it's about bombs. Energy is beside the point. I mean, it's there, but a lot of the energy part is nuclear energy. So just one factoid from that day, the $12 billion now of nuclear loan guarantees that have been approved at Plant Vogtle Units 3 and 4, $8.3 billion the Obama administration gave out. The other 3.7, Trump just rushed out the door. That was all kind of started on this day here at Sandia National Lab. And what I found really ironic, another telling thing, is that the stockpile of nuclear weapons out there. So this Energy Policy Act was signed surrounded by the biggest concentration of nuclear weapons on Earth. So as been mentioned already, December 2nd, 1942. We're 75 years on. Here's the Enrico Fermi pile, Chicago Pile 1, that put Chicago in danger, but they decided it was worth it. They didn't even tell the university president. We haven't solved the first cupful of radioactive waste that was generated 75 years ago. Leona mentioned the dump just outside of Chicago in the woods. And I really wanted to mention something. What was the code word used by the Manhattan Project leadership? It was Compton to Conant. Those were their last names, regarding Fermi's success. The Italian navigator has landed in the New World, and the natives are friendly. That was their code. So, a million, the figure of 1 million. I just wanted to put out there that irradiated nuclear fuel that comes out of an atomic reactor is 1 million times more radioactive coming out than when it went in as fresh fuel. 1 million times. It will kill you within seconds or minutes without radiation shielding. And was mentioned in one of the presentations by the students, 120,000 tons of commercial irradiated nuclear fuel coming to New Mexico, maybe another 40,000 tons right on the border in Texas. That's twice as much as exists right now in the country. There's 80,000 metric tons of commercial right now. So another figure, 1 million, the hazardous persistence of this high-level radioactive waste. It's deadly for 1 million years. The Environmental Protection Agency was forced to admit that under court order several years ago. That's 33,000 human generations into the future. Only it's a lowball estimate. Iodine-129 is hazardous for 157 million years, not 1 million. So with reactors, it's not just the radioactive waste. They have routine releases, a part of normal business. They have permits. They're allowed to do this. But as my board member, Kay Dry, has got it on my radar, there is no safe dose of radiation. So that symbol kind of says it all. So there's military production reactors like at Hanford, the worst contaminated site in the Western Hemisphere. The Russians have us beat, but it's pretty bad at Hanford. Hanford led to that Nagasaki mushroom cloud there and the devastation at Nagasaki, 74,000 deaths instantly. There's naval propulsion reactors going back to the 1950s with the subs, and then you have the USS Reagan in the foreground, contaminated during Fukushima because it was so close, and the sailors are sick and dying from that experience. Atoms for Peace, Eisenhower, 1953, a great big lie. It was a PR facade for the arms buildup. And Arjun Makhijani in 1999 wrote a book that really exposed this lie. They knew in real time that they were lying. So the generations of reactors, generation 1, early prototypes, 2, what we're living with currently, the 100 operating for the most part, 3, what we're kind of dealing with, and 3 plus, Vogel 3 and 4, for example, and then 4 is this pie in the sky, just believe us, give us money, and we'll make it happen. So the first civilian reactor was actually a military reactor. It was a submarine reactor, a Westinghouse pressurized water reactor built on dry land at Shippingport, Pennsylvania, by Admiral Rickover, and then operated by his nuclear Navy control room operators. So, you know, the overlaps between Atoms for Peace and Atoms for War are continuous throughout this history. Another early prototype was the Fermi 1. We almost lost Detroit. There's an excellent book, nonfiction. There's an excellent song by Gil Scott-Heron. And its original design was to provide plutonium for nuclear weapons. Then Eisenhower gave his Atoms for Peace speech. They couldn't get away with that, so then it was all about electricity at that point. I wanted to mention that Winona LaDuke a long time ago pointed out that the entire uranium fuel chain targets native sites. Big Rock Point atomic reactor in northern Michigan is sacred Odawa land. This is Rufina Marie Laws, who's an Albuquerque resident, right? Mescalero Apache, she was fighting the parking lot dump targeted at her reservation in New Mexico. That's the Prairie Island twin reactor site in the background in Minnesota, a native community. This plant and its waste and its reactors were plopped on top of the Prairie Island community against their consent. Another reactor type, Chernobyl, what happened to the people in large numbers. Generation 2, the reactors we're living with now, that's 3 Mile Island's melted down core. Davis-Besse in Ohio is a twin and has a cracked containment. San Onofre, the good news is the reactor shut down. They can't have a meltdown after they shut down, but the waste is still there. We've had a lot of shutdowns in recent years, and it's tremendous good news, but we have so many more to go. Yeah, sorry, I don't have time to. This is going to be posted so folks can examine it afterwards. This is Fukushima survivors at Indian Point. More reactor shutdowns to come. Diablo Canyon, there's pushback against the shutdown. Ratepayer bailouts to keep the old reactors operating. They're dangerously degraded. I'm from Palisades. It's Anishinaabe, Aki. It's specifically Potawatomi land. There are burials on this site overlooking Lake Michigan. It's referred to by the neighbors who live just beyond those cooling towers there as the monster up the beach. And it also discharges tritium into Lake Michigan. There's drinking water intakes right there in South Haven. All told, the Great Lakes are drinking water for 40 million people in 2 countries and a large number of Native American First Nations. It's all at risk from these reactors. So the boiling water reactors, the BWRs, Fukushima showed on live TV what they're capable of. The containments are too small and too weak. This is Ian Zabardi from the Western Shoshone Nation with Vermont Yankee in the background. A really sweet shutdown, 40+ years of grassroots activism to shut down Vermont Yankee. I know there's a lot of Vermonters who are here. My coworker Paul Gunter wrote this report inspired by Vermont Yankee and Illinois, leak first, fix later. There were tremendous tritium leaks in Illinois from the Braidwood atomic reactor. This little girl, Sarah Sauer, was diagnosed with brain cancer at age 7. The good news is she survived. Others didn't. We have too many of these boiling water reactors still going in this country. Many are a growing list of slated shutdowns, but these bailouts are prolonging our life support for these old, dangerous reactors. So we have to stop the bailouts. We have to stop the subsidies. I love this quote from John Trudell from his song, Look at Us, on the Tribal Voice album. We know the predator. We see them feed on us. We are aware. To starve the beast is our destiny. I mentioned the Canadian reactors, Canadian deuterium uranium reactors. These are not light water reactors like the US reactors, normal water for cooling and moderation. These are heavy water reactors for cooling and moderation. Originally a bomb design, actually. So the Great Lakes have a lot of reactors, a lot of waste, all aspects of the fuel chain. So the future, the good news is the nuclear renaissance is largely over. Also, Vogtle 3 and 4 are probably going to not happen, but it's going to be at tremendous economic loss to a lot of people who can't afford it. Small modular reactors, they couldn't get away with the giant reactors, so now they're going on the other end of the spectrum, and they want the public to pay for it at huge expense. Lots of sites across the country are being targeted. Lots of critiques out there. Generation 4, pie in the sky, all these different reactor designs. The funny thing is, Fermi 1, designed in 1950, melted down in 1966, is considered a Generation 4 reactor. The thorium reactors are from the 1940s, 1950s, so it's another lie. Again, Arjun debunked all this with his book in 1999, and we got to shut them down before they melt down. Thanks.
Next, we have Diane Dorigo, also from DC with Nuclear Information and Resource Services.
So I want the lights, and I want everybody to, this is a quick little tutorial, which many of you don't need, but if you could turn the lights on and then open up your booklets to the chart that has the nuclear fuel chain and waste. And I'm just going to run through it. What did I say? What did I say? I'll be addressing that. It's part of my thing. Okay, so y'all got your little charts out? And so what I want to do is talk about, I'm Diane Dorigo. I'm with Nuclear Information and Resource Service. I've been working there for a little over 30 years, and before that I'm from Western New York, where there is a reprocessing plant that operated and radioactive waste burial trenches, and it's just upstream of the Cattaraugus Reservation of the Seneca Nation. And in the time when the reprocessing was going on, and I'll tell you what that is in a minute, the water in Cattaraugus Creek was the hottest radioactive water in the country, and the kids playing in the creek, the people that lived and played downstream were never told. And so it's, my friends who are my age who grew up there are having many, many health problems. And so that's part of what got us into it. So uranium, when it's in the ground, is in most places not that concentrated, but what we need in order to make nuclear power and nuclear weapons is uranium-235. And so what they have to do is get that uranium up out of the ground, separate it, mill it, separate it from the other dirt and from the other elements, and then concentrate it in, let's see, so they grind it all up, and the different ways of mining it are people go in and dig it up, or there's now leachate mining where they inject chemicals into the ground and extract and dissolve it and then pull out the uranium and leave the chemicals in the aquifer. So at every step of the fuel chain there are wastes that are generated. So the uranium in the ground, there's a bunch of different uraniums. There's uranium-235 and 238 and 234, different isotopes. And that's just the difference between the number of neutrons in the uranium atom. The uranium-235 atom is the one that does the self-sustained chain reaction. So that's the one they really want for the core of the reactor, because then when the neutrons bang into it in the reactor, it splits, and then more neutrons go out and hit more uranium-235s, and it just keeps doing it and doing it. And every time it splits, though, it makes other radioactive elements, like strontium-90, which concentrates in our bones, cesium-137, which is a muscle seeker, and our hearts are muscles. And that's why around Chernobyl, there's a symptom, the idea of Chernobyl heart. A lot of kids have heart issues. There are hundreds of these radioactive elements that form when the uranium split. And this happens in the reactor core. So let's go through the chain. So we've got the mining and the milling. And at the mills, they separate out as much of the uranium, but then they need to separate the uraniums from each other. And they have a lot of the same characteristics. So what they have to do is convert the solid uranium into a gas and then send it to another facility where they run it through miles and miles of pipes so that they can then separate the heavier uraniums from the lighter uraniums. And then they get as much of the uranium-235 out as they can, and the rest of it is so-called depleted uranium, but it's only depleted in the 235, which is what they want. It's still hazardous, radioactive. It's not depleted in its danger. So then you have, from the enrichment that's called, step, you have depleted uranium as the waste. So then that uranium is converted back to solid and made into little pellets, like about that big, and they stack them in 12-foot long rods, and you get, depending if it's a boiling water reactor or a pressurized water reactor, you have 63 or 264 of these rods per assembly or bundle. And then you take a bunch of these bundles and put them in the core of the reactor, and there's water circulating around the core, and they start out the reaction with neutrons, so they get the neutrons going in there, and like I said, the neutrons then bang into the uranium-235s, and the uranium split, and the energy that held it together heats the water, turns the turbines, and makes the electricity, and that is about, I think, a third of that electricity actually gets used, and the rest of it's wasted, and then you have radioactive waste that's hazardous for hundreds and millions of years, literally. Iodine is formed when the uranium split. An iodine that's used in medical purposes, that's maybe a few days, a few hours half-life. But the iodine. Iodine for medical purposes is shorter lasting, but some of the iodine that's formed in the reactor core is radioactive for literally 160 million to 320 million years. And that's part of high-level waste and low-level waste. Oh, I wasn't timing myself. Like 3 minutes? Okay. Okay, so we've got the uranium and then it gets all processed, they make it into the fuel, and like Kevin said, when those assemblies go into the reactor core, they're radioactive. They've got uranium, and but then after they bang up in the core, then, and some of those uraniums absorb neutrons and form plutonium, which is 1/4 to 500,000 years hazardous. And so then you have the rods with this radioactive stuff in the rods. Those rods are the, quote, high-level radioactive waste. This is the stuff that's targeted for the Lee-Eddy County Holtec site, and also for waste control specialists right here over the border, closer to New Mexico communities than the actual Texas communities. These two sites, as was mentioned by one of the really great student presentations, are targeted for storing this waste from all the reactors in the country. So the high-level waste, as long as the plutonium atom is in those rods and the cesium and the iodines, it's high-level waste. But then the rods get little cracks and pinhole pricks, and it leaks out into the water that's circulating, and they filter the water, and those filters and resins and the routine releases that don't get filtered, that just go into the community's water, that's considered, quote, low-level waste. It's the same plutonium atoms, it's the same cesium, it's the same strontium, it's the same iodines, but as long as they're not in the rod anymore, they're low-level waste. They still cause cancer, they still cause birth defects, they still have all the health dangers, but they're harder to detect. So there have been, over the history of the US, 6 unlined soil trenches, and now we've got 8 so-called low-level waste dumps, and one of those is just over the border in Andrews County, Texas, just across from, next to the uranium enrichment facility in Eunice, New Mexico, is where one of the major so-called low-level dumps is in the country, and it brings in waste from both the nuclear power and the weapons. So low-level waste, the laws allow for unlined soil trenches, and it's actually expensive when they decommission reactors or they clean up. They don't want to have to pay to try to isolate it for the years that it would remain dangerous. So now there's a big push, which I spent a lot of time fighting, deregulating that waste. When you can't measure it as easily because it's less concentrated, and they want to actually recycle it into consumer goods and regular garbage. So these are ongoing fights, and that's with the so-called low-level stuff. Now, jumping back to high-level, it's at reactors, at every reactor in the country. And what they normally do is the fuel assemblies stay in the core of the reactor for anywhere from in the range of 3 years. And then they take it out of the reactor core, and they have to do it remotely because, as was mentioned, it's millions of times more radioactive than when it went in, immediate lethal dose, unshielded. So it's kept underwater, it's put through tunnels and put into fuel pools. These are 40-foot deep, water-filled pools that store the waste until it cools down thermally enough to be able to be moved into dry storage. And radioactively also, it breaks down some, but it takes literally, like we've been talking, thousands and millions of years for it to decay. We can't expect it's going to decay away. And there's no way to make it not be radioactive. We don't know how to convert it from a radioactive to a not. Okay, so what have they been doing with this high-level waste? It's in the pools are filled up. They tried putting more and more fuel into the pools. They re-racked it. And then they even tried separating the rods and the assemblies and crunching them together, rod consolidation, but then they realized that they might actually go critical in the pool because they weren't able to block the neutrons from continuing to jump back and forth. So it's expensive to make a new fuel pool, so then they started moving into dry storage. And the dry storage casks originally were a thicker type in this country, but then as they realized this was going to become routine, they wanted to be more economical. It's still $1 million a can, and you put, there's a tens or I think it was like 32 assemblies from pressurized water reactor, or it might be 37. Anyway, the different reactors, there's different companies that make containers. So those companies have joined up with, Holtec is one of the companies, they joined up with the Eddie Lee Alliance and Arriva, which has its subsidiary TN Americas and NAC International. They make casks, and they are teamed up with waste control specialists, and they want to bring the stuff to those locations. They are using their cans, their canisters at the reactor sites. The canisters cannot be monitored for cracks and leaks with the current technology. And there have been cracks in some of these thin-walled containers. The thicker containers that we made originally, they started saving money and making thinner-walled containers, so 5/8 inch thick walls on some of these containers for this fuel. And then they stack them up in the yard. It's a parking lot at the reactor site. What's even worse then is once they start moving it on the roads and rails, and it could take 30 or 40 years to bring it to a centralized place, and then we're nowhere further toward making the communities any safer where it's stored, because there'll still be radioactive waste. Well, you wouldn't have all the fuel there, but you're spreading the danger to all the people along the roads and rails. So the other thing that happened, and this I've got 30 seconds to describe, is they used to, at my site, where I'm from at West Valley, and at 4 of the nuclear weapons complexes in Washington, Idaho, Tennessee, and South Carolina, they reprocessed the fuel. They took the fuel, they chopped it up, they dissolved it in chemicals, and they extracted out the uranium that hadn't yet been split and used for energy. They pulled that uranium out, and the plutonium that was also formed, they pull that out, and the liquid and sludge that has all that high-level liquid with the strontiums and the cesiums and the iodines and the neptuniums and everything else is in this liquid chemical baths. And now the big deal is that's reprocessing. That's supposedly, going to make it better. Then they have to do another step to convert that into a solid. And for just 6 years of reprocessing commercial and weapons fuel together at West Valley, it's estimated to cost $10 billion to clean up that site, and they really don't know how to do it. They've now taken the solid that they formed, put it into canisters. They're sitting on the road next to the site, and so reprocessing only makes it worse, and I wanted to point that out because sometimes they call it recycling and say, oh, this is something to do with the waste and we shouldn't be. So high-level waste, you don't want to, you can't keep it in the pools forever, and it's dangerous in the pools because if the pools lose their coolant, you have all this radioactivity in your, that could be released from the pools and spread to the winds. So the high-level waste, we need to stop making it. And for that which is generated, you want to isolate it and store it as best as possible. Face the fact you're going to have to recontainerize it, and don't spread it around. And we have a concept, I've got papers outside about hardened on-site storage, which is a concept for better storing it at the reactor sites and near the reactor sites if they can't be right at it. I'm sorry for talking so fast. Thank you.
Next, we have Karen Haddon from Texas with the Seed Coalition. She will be talking about WCS and these high-level nuclear waste sites that we need to keep out of New Mexico and Texas.
And we got the too bright. Oh, okay, let's see. Is that it? And then I just moved this with the arrows.
That one? Is that good?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it can just sit there, and we'll hold it up later. Thanks. My name is Karen Haddon, and I'm the director of a group in Texas called Sustainable Energy and Economic Development Coalition, which is way too long. It's Seed Coalition. We're sorry about that. We work mostly in Texas, but we're working in New Mexico, too, with allies and friends, and we're really, really happy about that. I'll tell you a little bit about where I come from and some of what we've done. I live in Austin, and that's Tonkawa land that has been stolen. Several years ago, Rick Perry, I'm sorry to say his name, was our governor, and he got up on Earth Day and said, guess what, everybody? He was really excited. He said, I've got something really great for you. We're going to have 8 new coal plants. You know, we thought we would fall over. And then shortly after that, there were 15 total. And then before it was all over, there were 22 proposed. And Smitty, where are you? Smitty is my partner. And he and I got in a Prius and just started driving. We said, we have to go talk to everyone. You know, so it was like, and it was an adventure of a lifetime because we met wonderful people everywhere we went, and we met people that we had never met some of these people before, people who raised horses for ranching. I mean, that was their specialty. And a lot of ranchers and Western style folks who, you know, they probably didn't have the same politics as us, but we started talking to them, and they didn't like it. They decided it was a ring of fire of coal plants. And once they learned more about it, it was like the thrill of a lifetime because we'd go into hearings and all of a sudden there'd be some rancher up there. I was really mad about the mercury in the fish. It made me so mad. And these ranchers would get up there and just rail on the authorities and said, we're not putting up with it. And they used my favorite word, which is no. And, you know, it's a powerful word. You know, ask any 2 or 3-year-old, you know, do you see the power they use with no? You know, we should practice it. It's great. Hall no is great. So, and I just feel honored to be among the people in this room for that reason. So much talent. So in the end, you know, people rose up, and 5 of those coal plants out of 22 eventually got permits. Most of those didn't get built, and we got cleanup at some of the existing coal plants, so we defeated about 17. I mean, there was a lot of people that did this, but it worked, you know? Yeah, and so we should not feel afraid. We should just, you know, feel empowered and think, oh, what fun we can have doing this. And so next came, the minute we got done with it, next came nuclear plants. They wanted to build 8 nuclear reactors in Texas. What did we need? 0. We had no need for additional energy at this point in time. 4 of those units were serious, 2 at Comanche Peak, 2 at South Texas Project. And again, people organized. We helped the best we could. Attorneys came in, and we defeated them. Those did not get built. One of them got a license, but you know, delay is a beautiful tactic. And, you know, we strung that thing out for so long that, you know, yeah, and then the truth came through about how expensive a nuclear reactor is, and people said, oh, man, what were we thinking? And it's not getting built, and it never will. A lot of money. They had to go to Japan to find funding for the thing from Toshiba. It was crazy. But basically, I guess I want to say we can win. And thanks to Amelia Pedrogo for your presentation and for help organizing the summit coming up next Saturday in Roswell. And, you know, I share her outrage about what's being proposed right now. And we can go ahead and look at some of these. By the way, these beautiful murals are by Noel Marquez, who's in Artesia. And I couldn't help but put him in here, and he's used this too, but let's see. So, you know, throughout Texas and New Mexico, we have sacred lands. We're sharing the fact that the U.S. government sees us as the nuclear corridor, which is insane. Let's go the other way. You know, the U.S. Department of Energy, the DOE, went out in 2016 and tried to tell the whole country that we in Texas and New Mexico want radioactive waste. You know what they did? Did they ask you? Did they ask anybody? No, they did this based on Susana Martinez, for one. Okay, she's in support of these concepts. And they did it based on 4 county commissioners and the county judge in Andrews County in Texas. And they tried to tell everybody. And let me tell you where they went. If you look at a US map, it was a big arch. They went to a lot of cities: Chicago, Atlanta, Boise, Boston, Denver, Minneapolis, Tempe, Phoenix. And that was the closest they got to Texas and New Mexico. People who wanted to go testify couldn't get there in a day's drive. A lot of people had to fly. And everywhere the DOE went, they were telling people, this is all about listening to the stakeholders and those people who would be most impacted. We told, it was a consent process. It's like, I'm sorry, it's like, it boiled down to like you're asking everyone else for consent when who is going to bear the brunt? Texas, New Mexico. And at one of the hearings, I was really close to circling our states on a map and giving it to them and say, could you please find us? Here is where these states are. Lon Burnham was helpful at one of those meetings. We sort of derailed the Phoenix meeting a little bit. It was a lot of fun. So we dismantled it, and they were unhappy. I went to Minneapolis, and that was pretty fun too. So in Lake Arthur, Noel has led efforts to get the city to pass a resolution opposing the transport of high-level radioactive waste to and through the region. And that went pretty well, and again, this is one of his incredible murals. So far, the Democratic Party for the state of Texas has passed a resolution. The Rio Grande Sierra Club here in New Mexico, the Sierra Club in Texas. In Texas, counties stepped up, and that includes Bexar County, which has San Antonio, Dallas, Midland, and Nueces County, which has Corpus Christi. They have all passed resolutions saying don't bring that waste through here and don't do consolidated waste and storage. Even Midland, Midland was strange. We had some hardcore right-wing people on the county commission there, and a lot of people from the community stepped up and said, we don't want this. It's going to put at risk our businesses. Believe it or not, an oil company came to bat and said, we don't want it either. It risks oil business. So a lot of people said, we don't want it. And lo and behold, this incredibly right-wing county commission passed a resolution too. And they're worried about exposure to the people as this stuff comes on trains and it goes through the community. Because as this material goes on trains, it's never been done before. There has been shipment of nuclear material, but the Nuclear Regulatory Commission says, oh, we do this every day. No, they have done small shipments at low speeds for small distances, and they count those as thousands of shipments. This has never been done, totally unprecedented. Thousands of shipments across this country would occur if this plan moves forward, and it won't. We're going to say no. But we're not going to let them. Okay, John Heaton was at the New Mexico Interim Committee on radioactive and hazardous waste just a month ago, telling legislators that, in fact, Holtec would have one train car per train. So that means instead of 10,000 trains, which we expected, they would have 120,000 trains. And as Amelia pointed out, over 20 years to make this happen across the whole country. Any rail line, they can use any rail line. Nothing says you cannot. So here comes John Heaton saying it'll be 120,000 trains. Well, the Department of Energy estimated for Yucca Mountain that there would be an accident for every 10,000 trains. That's what they expect. 120,000, you do the math, what do we get? 12 potential accidents. Okay, and they said for a small accident where a minimum amount of radiation gets released, you can permanently contaminate 42 square miles of land. You can cause somewhere between $600 million and $9 billion to raise and remediate 1 square mile of a downtown area. And even the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, they're not known for being protective. They actually admitted that you've also got security concerns. And you know, it's one thing to have this waste on a site where you've got guards, you know where it is, who's around, you've got at least some barriers, but you put this stuff on trains and start moving it around, you are opening up a world of unforeseen possibilities. Let me move forward for a moment here. This is the family of Rose Gardner. Rose lives in Eunice, New Mexico. She wishes she could be here. She's with Alliance for Environmental Strategies that's hosting the meeting coming up. And this is her daughter, Bridget, Tony, and Aubrey. And they had these beautiful signs said, "We don't want it." Because this miracle happened at the hearings that were held for waste control specialists, the Texas site that wants to take this high-level waste from the whole country forever and ever, all of the waste. So we didn't know very many people that were going to testify, and at the very last minute, all kinds of people came forward, and largely because of one woman in her church and a really cool priest, and all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people surfaced, and waste control specialist who has the Texas site was just shocked because there was a whole room full of people holding these signs, and at first they were going to hold them up just one at a time now and then, and pretty soon they were holding them up all through the whole meeting. And the newspapers went nuts, and the television went nuts, and as of right now, they can still bring it back around, but as of right now, WCS has pulled their license application, and maybe if the company sells, they'll come around again. So right now, I'm hoping that we can all work together with resolutions, with actions with the legislature, with direct action, with creative ideas that people have, artwork and music and action. And let's tell them no about New Mexico. Thank you. Oh, there is a clipboard coming around. If you haven't signed a petition, please do.
All right, so next we're hearing from Don Hancock from my hometown of Albuquerque. Yeah.
Hi, thanks everybody. So the question is, WIP, the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, notice the last two words, pilot plant, is it going to be United States' only deep geologic repository? Go ahead, Leon. So, has anybody here been at WIP? Anybody been underground at WIP? Okay. So, the site is southeastern New Mexico. It's about 26 miles east of Carlsbad. The waste is put 2,150 feet below the surface. And there have been lots of problems. In 2014, there was a fire. Go ahead, Leona. February 5th, 2014, a salt hauling truck in the underground, running around in the underground 2,150 feet below the surface, caught on fire. As you can see, because the ventilation system also didn't work correctly, smoke from the underground came out the salt shaft at WIP. 86 workers were underground at the time. They were all evacuated. 13 were treated for smoke inhalation. One worker was totally disabled. He sued and settled for damages. Go ahead, Leona. 9 days later, the only operating continuous air monitor, the only operating radiation monitor in the underground, alarmed at night. Nobody was underground. Remember, the fire happened. Everybody had to be evacuated. That was really fortunate that there weren't people there. As a result of the little bit of radiation that was released, more than 8,000 linear feet of the underground is contaminated at WIP. There were no workers underground, but this says 22 workers have internal contamination. How did that happen? Because radiation came up the exhaust shaft to the surface. 22 workers were contaminated. What else didn't work? The radiation protection didn't work because all of those workers were told they weren't contaminated. So it was from 12 days to 8 weeks after they were internally contaminated before the workers were even informed that they were contaminated. None of those workers have gotten any ongoing medical treatment supplied by either the DOE or the contractor. Go ahead, Leona. So what does that mean for the workers now in the underground? It used to be, up on the left, workers would be in normal clothes like all of us. Now, as you can see at the lower right, they all are looking like they're in Ebola uniforms. They have to wear protective equipment, self-breathing apparatus because of the contamination in the underground. And these supposed reduced operations, after the facility was totally shut down for 3 years with no more waste coming in, they've now started bringing more waste in, and it's going to operate supposedly at this reduced level with all the workers in the underground dealing with waste in those kind of uniforms until at least 2021. Go ahead. So what else is happening? Could anything else go wrong? So this is a mine. It's a radiologically contaminated mine, but it's basically a salt mine. The reason, supposedly, that it's a good place to put waste is over time the salt moves. You mine out salt and it wants to close back. The salt at WIP moves around 3 inches a year, sometimes a little more than that, to fill back in the spaces. But when you don't keep working to keep the roof up, this is what happens. The ceiling collapses. In fact, in the area they're putting waste in now, where there is contamination, one of the areas of that underground collapsed last year. Another big room in the underground is going to collapse probably any day. Rather than moving 3 inches a year, it's moving over a foot a month. So it's going to come down. Go ahead. So what is this facility supposed to do? It's supposed to be a pilot plant. Has a 4-part mission. Start clean, stay clean. How'd they do with that? There's a legal limit set by Congress in the law of how much defense transuranic waste. Nuclear weapons, plutonium, contaminated materials is what can come to WIP. A lot of people in New Mexico, including some people in this room, spent a lot of time fighting to keep WIP from ever opening, but the end result was to limit in law, federal law and state legal agreements, what amount of waste and what type of waste can come to WIP. So when WIP started, there wasn't any waste there. How do you get the waste to WIP? It has to be transported through more than 20 states without serious accidents or releases. All of these shipments are on trucks. The idea, the reason you're moving it around is, we've heard a lot today, can we clean up these places? Well, DOE weapon sites are contaminated. Importantly, virtually all of the sites that are contaminated not just with transuranic waste, but they have other kinds of waste too, so WIP doesn't really solve all of their problem, if it worked. And then WIP is supposed to close up. It's supposed to operate for a while, close up, and how's it doing with that? Go ahead, Leona. So, from 1999 to last week, there had been a total of just over 12,000 shipments, truck shipments that had come to WIP. You can see about 50% of the shipments have come from Idaho. 14% of the shipments from the Savannah River site that Lindsay talked about. 11% from Los Alamos. Remember, Los Alamos has handled a lot of plutonium and generated a lot of transuranic waste too. Two kinds of waste come to WIPP: contact handled and remote handled. Contact handled are barrels that you can walk right up to. Remote handled waste, in addition to having plutonium, has some higher radionuclides, a little bit of cesium and strontium, that are penetrating, so you can't walk up to them. They have to be handled remotely. Total of 172,000 almost waste containers are in the underground. Go ahead. Yeah. But even before the accidents of 2014, WIPP was not. Did you skip a slide, Leona? Did you? Nope, you didn't. Okay, go ahead. You're fine. Even before the accident happened, you can see the first 6 panels, the first 6 areas that had been used had a shortfall of over 20,000 cubic meters. In other words, rather than filling all the rooms totally up, they didn't for a variety of reasons. Remote handled, they have even a bigger shortfall. They're going to have further shortfall in terms of the capacity. Panel 7 is contaminated. They can't use a lot of it. Rooms have collapsed, as we've talked about. So the shortfall is going to be continuing. And if they went ahead and filled up panels 7 and 8 as much as you can see, the capacity would still mean there's going to be more than 50,000 cubic meters of transuranic waste still left at Department of Energy sites. So how are we doing with disposing of it at WIPP? Go ahead. What else is going on at WIPP? 40 years ago, there weren't any oil, there were virtually no oil and gas wells around. A few had been drilled dry holes, but they weren't operating. Now, as you can see, there are more than 400 or 500 oil and gas wells within 2.5 miles of the boundary. That inner square is the 16 square mile site that is WIPP. And then 2.5 miles surrounding all the way, you can see there are more than 500 oil and gas wells. Lots of oil and gas there. What do people want to do? Companies want to come in and mine for oil and gas. What else do you do after you've had the easy pulling out of oil and gas? What do? You do fracking. So there's also now starting to be a significant amount of fracking occurring in some of these wells on the east side of the site. So the reason you put waste deep underground is so it'll be safe and it won't contaminate anybody and it won't get out. What happens when you can drill into and out of it? So what's DOE's solution to all these problems? Build another shaft besides the 4, mine more panels, change the WIPP law. Remember I mentioned their legal limits, so they want to change the law to do a number of things, to bring in additional surplus plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium, to bring in high-level waste from some of the tanks, to bring in commercial waste like the West Valley waste that Dee talked about earlier, and greater than class GTCC. The jargon is greater than class C. This is waste at reactor sites. They want to build, WIPP is for underground disposal, so what do they want to do? In addition, they want to build a surface area on the surface at WIPP. And they want to extend the operations. Remember I mentioned it's time limited too. Well, they want to extend the operations till at least 2050. Now notice the asterisk. All of those are things that we and the New Mexico State Environment Department have to approve. So these are ways that people can be directly involved. Go ahead, Leona. One other thing though that I want to mention, part of what's being the money that's being spent at WIPP, it used to be about $200 million a year. It's now about $300 million a year, about a 50% increase. Where's that going? That's going to the contractors, AECOM, Babcock and Wilcox, and you just heard about Arriva, the French company, is also part of the WIPP process now. So the contract has been increased, $650 million, 50%. for their good activity of blowing up the site, the contractor has been rewarded with not only more money, but 3 more years to be able to operate. This is part of the nuclear beast, too. The companies keep getting paid. Go ahead. Okay, so people can get involved. They can oppose those permit modifications that I mentioned. The federal law has to be changed. People can keep that from happening. We can elect a governor in 2018 that doesn't agree with these kinds of expansions and doesn't agree with the whole tech thing that has been talked about. And there are lots of organizations here and students, et cetera, that are working on this. So let me stop.
Okay, so we're running a little behind on schedule, but these panelists have come a long ways, so we're going to give them till 6:15 and try to get a few questions in. So do we have a question? Who has Okay, so we'll go here and then there.
Just for a little clarification, Dawn, the accident, is that the one that was precipitated by the wrong kind of kitty litter?
We don't actually know, actually.
Okay. And
we don't actually know. The Department of Energy has decided that, yes, there was the wrong kitty litter was used. Why would you use kitty litter in the first place? But how many people have cats and you use exploding kitty litter? Not so much, hopefully, most of the time. They don't actually know, but that's their suggestion. That's the Department of Energy's suggestion of what happened. The reason that you need to use absorbents with some of this waste is because there's a lot of nitric acid that's used in the process. Everybody knows nitric acid can be very corrosive, can have bad chemical reactions, explosions, etc. So they were trying to neutralize with kitty litter type stuff that nitric acid.
And second part, that release, did they not detect plutonium quite a ways away from that release?
So the predominant radionuclide that was actually released in the release was americium-241, not plutonium. So workers on the surface, as I mentioned, 22 of them did get contaminated. There was never a significant amount of radioactivity, plutonium or americium, detected very far away. The people who were closest were the workers at the site. The next closest people were, guess what, who are working on all those oil and gas wells. Oil and gas workers, none of them were ever tested to see whether they had contamination or not.
Okay, so before Jay goes, Lindsay has some fact sheets on Shell Bluff, so I'm going to pass those around, okay?
So I have a question for Lindsay. Now, I've been fighting pit production at Los Alamos for close to 30 years. Now I think there's a serious chance it could be moved to the Savannah River site. And specifically, they got a mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility, which has been a disaster and won't be open for that purpose. But I could see pit production possibly moving there. And I just wanted to ask you, and I should add, I've been to Savannah River, I've been to Aiken and Aiken County, and I'm sure they're all in favor of it. But how can we stop that if indeed that becomes a serious prospect? And I would want you to know that folks here in New Mexico could help you stop that. But what are the folks in Georgia and South Carolina going to be able to do about it, looking into the future?
Well, you know, to be honest with you, I can't say that I necessarily have an answer for you today, right now, but I welcome anyone to please connect with me, and perhaps we can brainstorm on some potential solutions. There's a lot of knowledge in this room, and we don't have to recreate the wheel. So I invite anyone to please connect with me. I would love to hear your ideas. And thank you for your question. And I'm sorry I don't have an answer for you. Okay, and quickly, I will not be here tomorrow, so please contact me today, or you can email me or talk to me after this. Thank you.
This is also for Lindsay. You referenced that there's intergenerational hiring at these contaminating industries, and I was just wondering, you know, how do you successfully change minds, you know, from, oh, it's good for jobs, from people who have worked generationally for these industries? Have you seen that happen? Somebody's mind get changed, and what was it that changed it?
Well, one of the things that we're recognizing works, and someone else mentioned on another panel, is alternatives. Alternative industries, alternative job opportunities. In addition to that, there was one gentleman that we met at one of our community talks just recently, and he's working, I think he's working at SRS, I don't remember, but we looked at his job title, and his job title had the word protector in it. And so when you really look at how people define themselves and how they feel about themselves and the jobs that they take on, you can kind of humanize and understand where they're coming from. And if you can kind of approach them on that level, it's better. Becky, our executive director, always says it's better to attract folks with honey instead of vinegar. And so approaching it at a human level is one way that we are working to build on, to really build those relationships, because we understand we don't want to go in and say, stop doing all these things, because we understand there's a lot that's holding all of this industry and this contaminating industry together. So we're trying to, like I said, build relationships and kind of move in a way that doesn't necessarily ruffle feathers so much. That makes sense. I hope that answers your question.
I have a quick question. A bunch of us were in Chicago almost exactly a year ago to now, and one of the big questions of that conference was making the connection between reactor communities, frontline communities who are impacted, and the communities who are targeted for this waste. And how do we create solidarity, and how do we create networks that are resilient and where we have each other's backs, basically. So I just want to throw that question out to all of you. Anyone to comment on that?
Well, one thought that comes to mind is that Deb Katz and Chris Williams with Citizens Awareness Network in the Northeast and others in that organization invited Rose Gardner and her daughters, Jessica and Bridget, up to the Northeast, and I was on that speaking tour too. And we had like 5 stops in a week, something like that, and they were all reactor community stops: Pilgrim near Boston, Seabrook in New Hampshire, Vermont Yankee. And that was the whole point, was to introduce those reactor communities to Rose and her family, who are targeted with the WCS site specifically, and all the transports that would go through Eunice to get there. So that was the effort, and especially at the Pilgrim site, there was some pushback because some people there who've been longtime watchdogs on Pilgrim want the waste out of there. And so that's why I really respect Citizens Awareness Network so much, because they really have the moral high ground. I mean, Deb lives like 5 miles from Yankee Row with all its waste, 15 miles or less from Vermont Yankee. She knows how dangerous it is. She's educated lots of people as to how dangerous the waste is, even at shut down reactors. But they've taken the moral high ground of not wishing their problem on anybody else. They did a caravan of conscience down to the Barnwell dump in South Carolina, right in this community that Lindsay's describing, to apologize and meet those people and try to fight back against the dumping of, you know, Massachusetts waste in black rural South Carolina in a leaking dump. You know, that was a decade ago or 15 years ago. So those kind of efforts, I think, are super valuable.
Okay, so we're going to hear from Karen real quick, and then we're going to move on to a video from Rose Gardner that she sent us because she couldn't be here with us this weekend. So we're going to watch a quick 2-minute video. And Lon, is your question able to wait maybe till tomorrow, or is it really?
Self-serving. Karen, which major metropolitan area with over 4 million people in it would be able to host most of this nuclear waste from the northeast if we end up dumping on southeastern New Mexico?
Dallas-Fort Worth, which is the reason Dallas County just passed a resolution against it.
I wanted to add briefly to what Kevin was saying about other communities. Rose Gardner also, her name is really Rose Gardner, and she really owns a florist shop. And she's in New Mexico, in Eunice, and she's close to both the WCS site in Texas, 5 miles away, and also to the Eddie Lee Alliance and Holtec proposed site, which is between Carlsbad and Hobbs. So she also has just gone out to California just this month. And that's where a lot of the problem is right now. There are some wonderful people in California, like Deb Katz, who are saying, yes, we generated this waste. It's our responsibility to store it. We don't want it on the cliffs over the ocean where San Onofre shut down, but we're willing to say it should be someplace in our state or closer by. We don't want to go dumping on Texas, New Mexico. At the same time, talk about environmental injustice. There are a lot of people in California, and some of them in positions of power, who think it's a perfect solution to dump on communities here. And so that's where a lot of the push for this is coming. And there will be bills coming up in Congress, and there might be in New Mexico too. We don't know yet. We can speak out on those congressional bills.
All right, let's thank the panel one more time and thank them for coming way out here. We have dinner to look forward to after this video.
Just recently, actually earlier this year, I did go to the East Coast and visited with some of the reactor communities there. I learned a lot of things, and primarily that they want to get rid of the nuclear waste and those nuclear power plants. They're sick and tired of being sick with illnesses and cancers caused by these facilities. More recently, I did go to San Diego last week and spoke with the Surfrider Club there. Again, they too have a mission on their agenda. They want to get rid of their nuclear waste that's right on the beach, on the coast. They're afraid of earthquakes and or terrorist activity causing those containers to fall into the ocean. We've got to help these communities, and yet we're the ones in New Mexico and Texas being targeted for this same waste. I had a message for them as well. We don't want the waste. There needs to be a permanent repository. I believe that one time moving the waste is more than enough. It's dangerous. We don't need this waste in New Mexico. We need a permanent place that is suitable in geology and hydrology. And not just that, we need to implement HOS, on-site storage, for the nuclear facilities that already have this waste there in their backyards. Furthermore, we need to be sure that any community that were to be targeted or selected for permanent storage gives them consent. These are all important things. The waste needs to go someplace safe. Thanks for listening. The fight goes on, and again, I'm with you. Please remember we have our summit on December 9th in Roswell. I hope you can come. I intend to be there, and we continue to fight the beast. Thank you, guys.